200 angels decided to betray heaven, not out of pride, not for power, but out of desire. They looked upon the daughters of men, saw that they were beautiful, and made a pact. A pact sealed atop Mount Hermon, with oaths that could not be broken. Each of them knew there was no turning back, and even so they descended. This story is not in Genesis. It is not in any of the 66 books of the Bible you know. It is found in a text so ancient that it was quoted by apostles, revered by early Christian communities, and then it disappeared. For more than 1,000 years, the Book of Enoch was treated as if it had never existed. Copies were destroyed, references were erased. Scholars who dared to mention it were silenced. But here is the question no one can answer. If this book was so dangerous, why does Jude, the brother of Jesus, quote it directly in the New Testament? And why has the Ethiopian church, one of the oldest in Christianity, never stopped considering it sacred? What exactly does the Book of Enoch reveal that made generations of religious leaders decide you shouldn't read it? Before we dive into the revelations, you need to understand what this book actually is. It is not just any text. It is possibly the oldest apocalyptic document to survive outside the Hebrew Bible. Fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the same scrolls that preserved parts of Isaiah and Deuteronomy. This means that Jewish communities 2 centuries before Christ treated Enoch with the same reverence they gave the prophets. The book takes its name from Enoch, the 7th patriarch after Adam. The Bible dedicates only 5 verses to him in Genesis 5 verses, and yet in those 5 verses something extraordinary happens. While all the other patriarchs lived and died, something different is written about Enoch. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him away. He did not die. He disappeared. He was taken. Where to? The Bible does not say. But the Book of Enoch tells everything. The text is divided into 5 main sections, and each of them reveals details about the ancient world that you won't find anywhere else. The first and most explosive is called the Book of the Watchers, and it is here that the story of the 200 angels begins. Genesis 6 opens with a passage that has confused scholars for millennia. It says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then it mentions that there were giants on the earth in those days, and then, almost immediately, God decides to destroy humanity, the flood. The connection between these events seems obvious, but Genesis explains nothing. Who were the sons of God? Why was their involvement with human women so grave? And where did the giants come from? The Book of Enoch answers each of these questions with details that will give you chills. The sons of God were angels, not metaphors, not pious human lineages, not descendants of Seth, as some interpretations try to suggest. They were celestial beings, inhabitants of heaven who abandoned their post. The text calls them watchers, in Hebrew, Irin, because their original function was to observe humanity without interfering. But they interfered. Their leader was named Semyaza. Enoch records that he gathered the others and said, "I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." The others replied, "Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." Do you understand what happened here? An angel, afraid of being punished alone, convinced 199 others to share the guilt. It was a conspiracy, an organized mutiny against the celestial order. And the location where they sealed this pact was not chosen by chance. Mount Hermon. This name appears repeatedly in the Bible, but rarely does anyone stop to think why. It is the highest mountain in the Levant region, standing at over 2,800 meters. In the ancient world, mountains were seen as bridges between heaven and earth, places where the divine touched the human. The watchers descended upon the summit of Hermon because they wanted to mark a point of transition from heaven to earth, from obedience to rebellion. And the name Hermon comes from the Hebrew root herem, which means devoted to destruction or accursed. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the Book of Enoch leaves no room for doubt about what happened next. The Watchers took human wives, and from these unions the Nephilim were born, the giants. But they were not just large beings. Enoch describes creatures 300 cubits tall, that is equivalent to approximately 135 meters, taller than the Statue of Liberty, taller than a 40-story building. Now, many scholars consider this number a symbolic hyperbole. Others suggest copying errors over the centuries. But even more conservative versions of the text describe beings of monstrous size, large enough to cause terror and large enough to consume resources that the earth simply could not provide. Enoch records, "The giants consumed all the produce of men until men could no longer sustain them. Then the giants turned against men and began to devour them, and they began to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink their blood." If this shocked you, like this video now, so it can reach more people who need to know this story. But the Watchers did not just bring genetic chaos, they brought knowledge. And here is a detail that completely changes how you see the ancient world. The Book of Enoch specifically lists what each angel taught humanity. Azazel, one of the leaders, taught men how to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He taught women how to use bracelets, ornaments, cosmetics, and precious stones. Another angel, Shemi-Haza, taught enchantments and the cutting of medicinal roots. Armaros taught how to resolve enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the signs of the stars. Tamiel taught astronomy. Azradel taught the course of the moon. Do you realize what is happening here? Technology, metallurgy, cosmetics, herbal medicine, astrology, astronomy, all of this, according to Enoch, was not discovered naturally by humanity. It was transmitted by beings who should not have shared this knowledge. It is a completely different explanation for the rise of civilization, and it was not neutral knowledge. The text makes it clear that these revelations corrupted humanity. Weapons transformed peaceful tribes into armies. Cosmetics and adornments fueled vanity and seduction. Enchantments opened doors to occult practices. Astrology diverted worship from the Creator to the stars. The antediluvian world, according to Enoch, was not a primitive society trying to survive. It was an advanced civilization built on forbidden foundations, a humanity that knew too much, too fast, for the wrong reasons. And God saw everything. 4 archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, observed from the celestial perspective and brought the cry of the earth to the throne of God. The text records the divine response in details you won't find anywhere in the canonical Bible. For Azazel, the sentence was specific. Bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the darkness. Open the desert which is in Dudael and cast him therein. And place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever. Cover his face that he may not see light. And on the day of the great judgment he shall be cast into the fire. Did you hear that? The rebel angels were not simply sent away, they were imprisoned in specific places, under rocks, in complete darkness, awaiting a final judgment that has not yet happened. And the giants, the order was even more brutal. Destroy the children of the Watchers from amongst men. Send them one against the other that they may destroy each other in battle. The Nephilim would not die of natural causes. They would kill one another. A civil war between giants that would leave the earth soaked in blood. But here enters something that few realize and which connects Enoch directly with the New Testament. What happened to the spirits of the giants after their bodies died? Enoch 15:8-10 answers, "Now the giants who are produced from the spirits and the flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies. They shall afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle and work destruction on the earth and cause trouble. The giants generated demons. The disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, according to this text, are the unclean spirits that Jesus and the apostles faced. Not fallen angels, those are chained, but the hybrid children of those angels wandering without a body, seeking hosts. If you had never heard this theory about the origin of demons, comment, "I did not know." And where does Enoch fit into all of this? He was not just an observer, he was chosen as an intermediary. When the Watchers realized they were doomed, they did something desperate. They asked Enoch, a human being, to intercede for them before God. Think of the irony. Angels who abandoned heaven needing a mortal man to speak to the Creator on their behalf. Enoch accepted. He wrote a petition for forgiveness on behalf of the fallen angels. And then he was taken to the presence of God to deliver that petition. The response? Denied. Say to the Watchers of heaven, who have sent thee to intercede for them, you should intercede for men, and not men for you. Why have you left the high, holy, and eternal heaven, and lain with women, and defiled yourselves with the daughters of men, and taken to yourselves wives, and done like the children of earth, and begotten giants? From that moment on, Enoch's visions change tone. He stops being a failed intercessor and becomes a privileged prophet. God did not just reject the angel's request, he began to show Enoch things that no other human being had ever seen. The following sections of the book describe journeys through the heavens. Enoch is taken by angels through dimensions, cosmic mountains, prisons of disobedient stars, and places where light and darkness are physically separated. He sees the tree of life. He sees the throne of God made of crystal, surrounded by rivers of fire and ice. He sees the workings of the cosmos, the path of the sun, the phases of the moon, the seasons, the portals through which the winds blow. The level of cosmological detail is impressive for a text of such antiquity. Enoch describes a system of portals in the sky through which the sun enters and leaves, governing the calendar. He describes constellations and their functions. He describes angels responsible for each element of nature, but among all these visions, one stands above the rest. Enoch was taken to Sheol, the place of the dead. He describes 4 separate sections, caves or chambers where souls await judgment. One for the righteous, one for sinners who were not punished in life, one for martyrs and victims of injustice, and one for the wicked who will receive eternal condemnation. This structure of the afterlife deeply influenced Jewish and Christian thought. When Jesus tells the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, where the rich man is in torment and Lazarus is in the bosom of Abraham, separated by a chasm, he is using a cosmology that directly echoes the visions of Enoch. The inevitable question arises, did Jesus know the Book of Enoch? We cannot state with certainty that Jesus read or quoted Enoch directly, but we can state something that is verifiable. The religious environment in which Jesus grew up was saturated with this text. The Dead Sea Scrolls, dated between 200 BC and 70 AD, contained at least 11 fragmentary copies of Enoch. That is more copies than many biblical books had in that community. And here is the most direct proof that the writers of the New Testament knew and respected Enoch. Jude, verses 14 and 15. Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone, and to convict all of them of all the ungodly acts they have committed in their ungodliness, and of all the defiant words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. This quote is practically identical to Enoch 1:9. Jude is not paraphrasing, he is quoting, and he calls Enoch a prophet. So why was this book rejected? The answer is more complicated than any conspiracy theory suggests. In the first centuries of Christianity, there was no defined Bible. Different communities use different collections of texts. The Church of Ethiopia included Enoch in its canon and never removed it. To this day, it is considered sacred scripture there. But in the West, several factors contributed to the book's disappearance. First, an alternative interpretation of Genesis 6 emerged. Thinkers like Augustine argued that the sons of God were not angels, but the pious descendants of Seth. This interpretation avoided the complicated theological issues raised by angels having sexual relations with humans. Second, some sections of Enoch, especially the detailed cosmology, began to seem contradictory to the science of the time. As the Greco-Roman world adopted more sophisticated astronomical models, Enoch's descriptions of solar portals and imprisoned stars sounded archaic. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the book was too dangerous in the wrong hands. The descriptions of magic, enchantments, and forbidden angelic knowledge could be used to justify practices that the burgeoning church was trying to combat. But the content of Enoch did not completely disappear from Christian tradition. If you look carefully, you will notice its influence everywhere. The idea of rebel angels chained until judgment appears in 2 Peter. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to Tartarus, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. Tartarus. This is the only time this word appears in the New Testament. It is a term from Greek mythology for the deepest prison of the underworld. Peter is clearly referencing a tradition that goes far beyond Genesis, a tradition preserved in Enoch. The letter to the Hebrews also mentions something interesting. In speaking of the angels, he says, "He makes his angels spirits and his servants flames of fire." Angels with specific cosmic functions, exactly what Enoch describes in detail. What does all this mean for us today? Well, the Book of Enoch offers something the canonical Bible does not: context. It fills in the gaps. It explains why the flood was so radical. It describes the origin of supernatural evil. It shows that the antediluvian world was not just corrupt. It was genetically contaminated, spiritually invaded, cosmically unbalanced. When you read Genesis 6 after knowing Enoch, everything changes. There were giants on the earth in those days, stops being a mysterious phrase and becomes a cosmic death sentence. The wickedness of man was great stops being a moral observation and becomes a diagnosis of a civilization that had crossed every allowed limit. And when you read Jesus' words about the days of Noah, that they would be similar to the days before his return, the comparison gains a layer of meaning that most modern readers never notice. But the Book of Enoch does not end with the flood. In fact, the most fascinating sections are in the prophetic visions Enoch received about the future, and it is here that the story gets even stranger. There is a section known as the Parables of Enoch, or Similitudes, that describes a figure called the Son of Man. This being is presented sitting on a throne of glory, judging angels and men, existing before creation, chosen to reveal the mysteries of God to the righteous. The language is strikingly similar to the way Jesus referred to himself and the way the Gospels describe his cosmic authority. Coincidence? Or could it be that the term Son of Man, which Jesus used constantly, carried a much greater theological weight than we imagine, a weight that his first-century listeners immediately recognized because they knew the traditions of Enoch? Still, in this video, we will get into the most controversial sections of the book. The astronomical visions seem to describe a completely different calendar from the one we use today. The prophecies about the end times that mysteriously echo the revelation of John, and the question that divides scholars to this day: was Enoch just an imaginative mystic, or did he actually see things that transcend our understanding of the universe? But first, we need to understand what the world Enoch describes was like. This period, 5,000 years ago, when, according to the text, the line between heaven and earth had not yet been completely sealed. Imagine a world without borders between dimensions. A world where angels walked among humans, where forbidden knowledge flowed freely from heaven to earth, where creatures 10 feet tall or more dominated entire territories. This was the antediluvian world according to Enoch. And to understand his visions, you must first accept that he was not describing metaphors. He was describing his reality. The text mentions cities, structures, social organization. The giants did not live like wild animals. They ruled. They consumed resources on scales that devastated entire regions. They forced human populations to serve them. They established hierarchies of power that reflected in a distorted way the angelic hierarchies their fathers had abandoned. And humanity, divided between those who resisted and those who collaborated, between those who maintained worship of the Creator and those who bowed to the new hybrid lords. The knowledge the Watchers brought was not contained in one region. It spread. Metallurgy techniques allowed for the creation of weapons on an industrial scale. The secrets of astrology and enchantments created a priestly class that rivaled any genuine connection with the divine. Cosmetics and adornments transformed entire cultures into societies obsessed with appearance and seduction. Enoch describes a world that in many ways feels disturbingly familiar. Advanced technology, knowledge separated from wisdom, power concentrated in the hands of beings who answered to no one. A humanity distracted, divided, manipulated. And then came the flood, but before the flood came Enoch, a man who walked with God in the midst of chaos, a prophet who received visions not only of the past and present, but of the complete functioning of the cosmos. The third section of the Book of Enoch is called the astronomical book, and it is perhaps the strangest of all. Here, Enoch is guided by the angel Uriel through the celestial mechanisms. He describes portals, literally openings in the sky, through which the sun enters and leaves. There are 6 portals in the east and 6 portals in the west. Depending on the time of year, the sun uses different portals, creating longer or shorter days. Does it sound primitive? Perhaps, but consider what Enoch is trying to communicate. An ordered system, a cosmos governed by precise laws, a universe that is not chaotic, but managed by angelic intelligences following specific protocols. And here enters the detail that generated the most debate among scholars: the calendar. The Book of Enoch advocates for a solar calendar of 364 days. Not 365, not lunar like the traditional Jewish calendar, a year of exactly 364 days, divided into 4 seasons of 91 days each, with 52 complete weeks. Every year begins on the same day of the week. Every festival falls on the same day of the week. Every year. Why does this matter? Because the Qumran community, the one that preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls, followed exactly this calendar. They considered the lunar calendar used in Jerusalem to be a corruption, an innovation introduced by corrupted leaders. For them, following the wrong calendar meant celebrating the feasts on the wrong days, which invalidated their worship. Now think about this. A dispute over a calendar seems trivial to us, but for these ancient communities, it was a matter of spiritual life and death. The Book of Enoch was not just religious literature, it was a manual on how to live in sync with the cosmos as God designed it. Uriel shows Enoch more than just the calendar. He shows the prison of the disobedient stars. Yes, disobedient stars. In a place at the ends of the cosmos, Enoch sees celestial bodies that transgress the commandment of God by not appearing at their appointed times. They are chained in a place of darkness, awaiting judgment. This sounds like fantastic mythology until you realize the cosmology behind it. In ancient thought, Jewish, Babylonian, Greek, there was no clear separation between celestial bodies and celestial beings. Stars were not just balls of gas. They were in some way entities, governors, responsible for functions in the great cosmic system. When the revelation of John speaks of stars that fell from heaven, or when Daniel mentions a war in the heavens, they are using the same language, a language that Enoch helps to decode. But Enoch's visions do not stop at the functioning of the present cosmos. They move forward into the future, and here the book becomes genuinely prophetic. The section known as the Epistle of Enoch contains prophecies about the end times that are strikingly parallel to the revelation of John. Enoch describes the resurrection of the dead. He describes a final judgment where books are opened and every action is weighed. He describes the destruction of the wicked and the reward of the righteous. He describes a new creation, a renewed earth where death no longer exists. Some of these prophecies are so specific that scholars spent centuries debating whether John knew Enoch or if both were drinking from an even older common source. For example, Enoch speaks of 70 shepherds who would receive authority to rule Israel and would abuse that authority. History would be divided into specific periods of oppression before God's final intervention. And then there is the animal apocalypse. This is one of the most elaborate sections of the book. Enoch receives a complete allegory of human history where people are represented by animals. Adam is a white bull. His descendants are bulls of various colors. Israel are sheep. Their enemies are wolves, lions, leopards, eagles. The narrative covers everything from creation to the final judgment, passing through events we recognize from the Old Testament: the flood, the patriarchs, the Exodus, the judges, the kings, the exile. But it does not stop at Enoch's time. It continues. And here is what fascinates scholars. The vision seems to predict events that would happen centuries after it was written. The Maccabean revolt, that Jewish rebellion that reconquered the temple and gave rise to Hanukkah, seems to be encoded in the vision. Sheep that grow horns and begin to fight against the predators, a transformation of victims into warriors. Does this mean the Book of Enoch was written after these events and merely disguised as prophecy? Some scholars think so. They date certain sections of the book to the Maccabean period, around 165 BC. But there is a problem with this theory. The fragments found in Qumran are older than that, and the structure of the text suggests layers of composition, some sections clearly older than others. The astronomical book, for example, shows signs of being much older than the parables. The truth is that we do not know exactly when each section was written. What we do know is that very ancient communities treated this material as genuinely prophetic. They organized their lives around it. They died defending it. And perhaps that is the wrong question. Perhaps instead of asking when was it written, we should ask why did it resonate so deeply for so many centuries? The answer may lie in something the Book of Enoch offers that few other texts do: a unified narrative. A story that connects creation to the apocalypse, passing through the fall of the angels, the flood, the history of Israel, and culminating in a cosmic judgment where everything is finally set right. The canonical Bible also tells this story, but in fragments. You have to piece together Genesis with Daniel, with the Gospels, with Revelation, to get the complete picture. Enoch delivers it all in a single narrative flow, all seen through the eyes of a single prophet who literally walked between dimensions. For a community trying to understand its place in the cosmos, especially a persecuted, marginalized community waiting for divine intervention, this kind of narrative was more precious than gold. And then there are the parables of Enoch, sections 37 to 71, the mystical heart of the book. Here, Enoch is elevated to even higher dimensions. He sees countless angels around the throne of God. He sees the dwelling of the righteous, a place of light and peace where the saints await the resurrection. And he sees, repeatedly, a figure who dominates all the visions: the Son of Man. This being is described with language that any reader of the New Testament would immediately recognize. He is called the Elect One. He was chosen before the creation of the world. All authority is given to him. He will judge angels and humans. The kings and the mighty of the earth will tremble before him and plead for mercy, but it will be too late. Enoch 46, 3-4. This is the Son of Man who hath righteousness, with whom righteousness dwelleth, and who revealeth all the treasures of that which is hidden, because the Lord of spirits hath chosen him, and whose lot hath the preeminence before the Lord of spirits in uprightness forever. Who is this Son of Man in the parables of Enoch? Traditional Jewish interpretation saw this figure as a distinct celestial being, a supernatural, pre-existent, almost divine Messiah in his authority. Not an ordinary human being who would be anointed, but a cosmic entity awaiting the moment to be revealed. Christian interpretation naturally sees Jesus. Jesus himself used Son of Man as his preferred title. He refers to himself this way more than 80 times in the Gospels. And when the high priest asks if he is the Messiah, Jesus replies, "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." This response was considered blasphemy. The high priest tore his clothes. Why? Because Jesus was not just claiming to be the human Messiah, he was claiming to be that cosmic figure from the visions of Enoch and Daniel. He was saying, "I am the one you read about in the apocalyptic scriptures, the one who will judge angels and men, the one who exists before creation." But the parables bring a final twist that confuses scholars to this day. In chapter 71, after all the visions of the Son of Man as a separate, distinct figure, something happens. An angel approaches Enoch and says, "Thou art the Son of Man who is born unto righteousness, and righteousness abideth over thee." Did you hear that? Enoch is identified as the Son of Man. How is this possible? How can a mortal human being be identified with a cosmic, pre-existent entity? Most scholars consider this passage a later addition, an attempt to create an exaltation theology where righteous human figures are elevated to celestial status. But others see something deeper here. The idea that divine identity can be participated in. That humans, at some level, can be incorporated into the cosmic function represented by the Son of Man. If this sounds strange, remember, Paul wrote that Christians are in Christ and will judge angels. The language of participation in divine identity is not foreign to the New Testament. And here we come to one of the most fascinating questions. What is the real relationship between the Book of Enoch and the New Testament? We have already seen that Jude quotes Enoch directly. We have already seen that Peter seems to know the tradition of the chained angels. We have already seen that the language of the Son of Man carries theological weight that comes from outside the canonical Hebrew Bible. But there is more. The letter to the Hebrews 11:5 mentions that by faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. But it adds, for before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Where is this commendation recorded? Not in Genesis, which only says that he walked with God. The expanded testimony, the divine confirmation of God's pleasure, comes from the traditions of Enoch. The Apostle Paul, in 1 Corinthians 6, writes something seemingly strange. "Do you not know that we will judge angels?" Where does this idea come from? There is nothing in the canonical Old Testament about humans judging angels. But in the Book of Enoch, the tradition that human beings will participate in the judgment of the watchers is well established. The righteousness of the saints will be used as the standard to condemn those who fell. Is Paul quoting Enoch? Probably not directly. But he is operating within an apocalyptic tradition where Enoch was a fundamental source. Ideas flowed, concepts were shared. The boundary between canonical and non-canonical simply did not exist in the clear way we imagine today. And the revelation of John. The parallels are so numerous that some scholars argue John had Enoch open while he was writing. Both describe 7 archangels before the throne of God. Both describe stars falling from the sky as a symbol of celestial beings in rebellion. Both describe books being opened at the judgment. Both describe the final destruction followed by a new creation. Both use language of celestial portals, a crystal throne, a river of fire. And both end with a vision of eternal peace, a world where death has been abolished, where the righteous dwell in the presence of God forever, where everything that was distorted by the Watchers and their descendants is finally restored. The difference? Revelation puts Jesus at the center, the Lamb who was slain and who is worthy to open the seals. In Enoch, the Son of Man remains more abstract, more mysterious. But the cosmic structure is the same. Now you may be thinking, if the Book of Enoch influenced the New Testament so much, why did the same leaders who canonized the New Testament reject Enoch? The answer has several layers. First, early Christianity was trying to distinguish itself from Gnostic movements that worshipped angels and sought secret knowledge. Enoch, with its detailed descriptions of angelic hierarchies and revealed knowledge, could easily be co-opted by these groups. Rejecting the book was a way to establish boundaries. Second, the question of authorship. Everyone knew that Enoch had not literally written the book. It was a pseudepigraphal work, written in the name of an ancient figure. While some accepted this practice as legitimate, others considered it problematic for inclusion in sacred scriptures. Third, the diversity of versions. Unlike the biblical books, which were copied with extraordinary care, Enoch existed in multiple forms, with sections appearing or disappearing depending on the community. Which version would be canonized? But perhaps the deepest reason is simply that Enoch was too uncomfortable. It forced questions that the burgeoning theology preferred to avoid. Can angels sin sexually? Are demons hybrid descendants? Is human knowledge partially demonic in origin? Is there a correct calendar that most Christians are ignoring? Can humans be elevated to quasi-divine status, as Enoch apparently was? It was easier to leave these questions on the margins, to accept Enoch's influence without explicitly accepting Enoch, to quote his ideas without quoting his source. And so, for more than 1,000 years, the book disappeared from the West. Greek copies were lost. References were forgotten. Scholars who mentioned the text were treated as historical curiosities, until 1773. In that year, Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Ethiopia carrying 3 complete manuscripts of the Book of Enoch in Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopian language. For the first time in centuries, Western scholars could read the full text. The impact was explosive. Here was a book quoted in the New Testament, referenced by the Church Fathers, and now revealing its full content. Translations spread, debates reignited. And with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, containing fragments of Enoch in Aramaic, 1,000 years older than the Ethiopian manuscripts, it became clear that this text was genuinely ancient, not a medieval forgery. What the Qumran fragments revealed was even more surprising than the Ethiopian manuscripts. They showed that the text was revered by a community that existed during the life of Jesus. The Essenes, if indeed they were Essenes, organized their days by Enoch's calendar. Their prayers reflected Enoch's language. Their messianic expectations were shaped by Enoch's visions. And they lived just a few miles from Jerusalem, on the shores of the Dead Sea, waiting for the final war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. A war that Enoch had described centuries before. Think about what that means. When John the Baptist preached in the desert, calling for repentance before the imminent judgment, he was using language that resonated with traditions these communities knew intimately. When Jesus spoke of the Son of Man coming on the clouds to judge the nations, his listeners were not confused. They had context. They had expectations. They had Enoch. But what else does the Book of Enoch reveal about biblical times that the canonical Bible leaves in the shadows? Consider spiritual geography. Enoch maps the cosmos in a way that no other ancient text does with such precision. He describes the ends of the earth, places where the sun does not reach, where winds are stored in chambers, where the waters of the abyss meet the foundations of heaven. He visits mountains that pierce the clouds and valleys that descend below any known depth. And in each place, he finds function, purpose, angelic administration. That mountain, it is where the spirits of the dead await judgment, separated into different chambers based on their righteousness or unrighteousness. That burning valley, it is prepared for the kings who oppressed God's people. That garden in the east, it is where the tree of life still exists, guarded for the righteous of the future age. This is not physical geography, it is metaphysical geography. And it reveals how the ancients thought about the structure of reality. For them, the visible world was just the surface. Below, above, beyond, there existed dimensions where spiritual causes produced material effects, where decisions made by celestial beings resulted in wars, famines, and plagues on earth, where the prayers of the righteous rose like incense to the throne and moved the hand of God in history. Enoch did not invent this cosmology, he articulated it. He gave literary form to an understanding that permeated all ancient Near Eastern thought. And when we read the canonical Bible without this context, we lose entire layers of meaning. When Psalm 82 speaks of God judging among the gods and accusing them of perverting justice, who are these gods? Enoch answers, they are the watchers and their allies. When Deuteronomy 32 mentions that God divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God, what does that mean? Enoch provides the context. Each nation was assigned to a celestial being, and some of these beings abused their authority. There is another aspect that Enoch illuminates in a unique way, the nature of evil. In the canonical Bible, especially in the Old Testament, the origin of evil remains strangely vague. The serpent appears in Genesis 3 without explanation. Where did it come from? Why did it tempt Eve? The text does not say. Satan appears in Job as a member of the celestial court, apparently with legitimate access to God's throne. How does that work? The text does not explain. Enoch fills in these gaps. Evil, in Enoch's view, has a history. It has a traceable origin. It began when 200 angels decided to abandon their celestial vocation to satisfy desires that did not belong to them. Evil is not an eternal abstraction. It is the result of specific choices made by specific beings at specific moments. And more importantly, evil was defeated the moment it was committed. The sentence was pronounced before the consequences fully manifested. The watchers were chained. The Nephilim were destroyed. God's final victory is not uncertain. It has been guaranteed from the beginning. What remains is the execution of the sentence. This theology of evil as something already defeated, but not yet completely eradicated, permeates the New Testament. When Jesus says he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven, he is using Enochian language. When Paul writes that the principalities and powers were disarmed on the cross, he is assuming a cosmology where hostile celestial beings exert influence that is being systematically dismantled. When Revelation describes the war in heaven, where Michael and his angels cast out the dragon, this is not an uncertain future battle. It is the final manifestation of a victory that was secured before the flood. Enoch provides the prologue to this cosmic drama. Without it, we enter the New Testament in the middle of the story, trying to understand references to conflicts that were never explained. And then there is the matter of intercession. In the Book of Enoch, The righteous pray. Their prayers rise to heaven, and specific angels are designated to carry these prayers to the throne. The four archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel, are not just warriors. They are intermediaries. They are advocates who present the cries of humanity before God. When Abel's blood cries out from the ground, it is not a poetic metaphor. It is a prayer that the angels take to the throne. When the humans oppressed by the Nephilim cry out for liberation, those voices are heard in the celestial chambers, and God responds, not immediately, not in the expected way, but with surgical precision at the appointed time. This theology of intercession explains passages in the New Testament that seem strange in isolation. Why does Revelation describe an angel with a censer full of prayers? Why does Hebrews speak of a great cloud of witnesses? Why did Christian tradition develop such a strong emphasis on the prayer of the saints? The roots are in Enoch, but perhaps the most relevant aspect of the Book of Enoch for understanding biblical times is what it reveals about forbidden knowledge. We live in an age that treats all knowledge as neutral. Information is information, we say. The problem lies only in its use. The same technology that heals can kill, but the technology itself is neither good nor evil. Enoch fundamentally challenges this assumption. The Watchers did not teach neutral techniques. They revealed secrets that should not have been revealed at that time, in that way, to that humanity. The knowledge of metallurgy for weapons accelerated violence beyond what society could ethically absorb. Enchantments created dependence on spiritual powers that enslaved rather than liberated. Cosmetics fueled vanities that corroded communities. Problem was not information in the abstract. It was information without formation, power without maturity, ability without wisdom. This resonated deeply with the communities that preserved Enoch. The Essenes at Qumran lived deliberately simple lives. They rejected luxury. They rejected ornamental metallurgy. They rejected the cosmetics and perfumes of Jerusalem. Why? Because they saw in these things the mark of the original rebellion, the poisoned gifts of the Watchers. And when we look at the teachings of Jesus, blessed are the poor, beware of riches, the kingdom belongs to those who become like children, we see echoes of this same sensibility. A deep suspicion that the way up first passes through the way down. That the knowledge the world celebrates may be precisely the knowledge that distances one from God. Paul captured this when he wrote that the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. It was not anti-intellectualism. It was the realization that there is a descending wisdom, that of the Watchers, and an ascending wisdom, that which comes from above, which is pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive. And then there is the question we cannot avoid. What happened to the spirits of the Nephilim? Enoch is explicit. When the giants died in the war between themselves, in the flood, in catastrophes, their bodies were destroyed, but their spirits remained. Why? Because they were hybrids, neither fully angelic to return to heaven, nor fully human to descend to the common Sheol. They were something in between, something without an assigned place in the cosmic order. These spirits, according to Enoch, became what the New Testament calls demons, disembodied entities that seek to inhabit, influence, and torment. They know their sentence. They know the judgment is coming. But until then, they wander. When Jesus confronts demons in the Gospels and they scream, "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" They are quoting their own theology. They know the schedule. They know there is a time designated for their final torment, and they recognize in Jesus the authority of the one who will execute the sentence. This explains why Jesus' exorcisms were so central to his ministry. They were not just healings, they were declarations of war. Every demon cast out was a sign that the kingdom of God was invading occupied territory. Every liberation was an anticipation of the final judgment that Enoch had seen in vision. And when Jesus gave authority to his disciples to cast out demons, he was extending this war. He was recruiting humans to participate in the reversal of the Watcher's catastrophe. The children of Adam, who had been victims of the rebel sons of God, now received power over the spirits of those who had oppressed them. The irony is deliberate. The justice is poetic. The cosmos is being corrected. But Enoch also raises a disturbing question that the canonical Bible leaves open. Why did God allow this to happen? If God knew the Watchers would descend, and as an omniscient God, he knew, why did he not stop it? If forbidden knowledge would cause so much harm, why allow it to be transmitted? If the Nephilim would devastate the earth, why let them be born? Enoch does not answer directly, but he offers clues. In his visions, the fall of the Watchers serves as a demonstration, a test case, permanent proof that rebellion against the created order ends in destruction. The angels who remained faithful saw what happened to those who fell. The humanity that survived the flood carried the memory of what the alliance with rebel powers produced. Evil was allowed so that it could be defeated. Rebellion was allowed so that it could be judged. And this judgment would be so complete, so public, so inescapable, that it would echo through all ages as a warning and a promise. This is what theologians call theodicy, the justification of God's ways in the face of evil. And Enoch offers a cosmic theodicy. Evil is not a defect in the system, it is a phase in the plan, a necessary phase to demonstrate truths that could not be demonstrated in any other way. The reality of angelic free will, the seriousness of sin, the certainty of judgment, God's faithfulness in preserving a remnant. Noah was preserved not because he was perfect, but because he was righteous in his generation. In the midst of universal contamination, he maintained something, a lineage, a connection with the Creator, a refusal to bow to the new hybrid lords, and from him, all of humanity began again. When you read the Old Testament after absorbing Enoch, certain patterns become visible. Why did God command the complete destruction of certain Canaanite nations? The texts speak of peoples like the Anakites, whom Numbers 13 describes as giants, descendants of the Nephilim. The war of conquest was not simply territorial. It was a continuation of the war against the contaminated lineage, a cleansing of what the Watchers had sown. Why was the Mosaic law so specific about not mixing categories, not mixing fabrics, not crossbreeding animals of different species, not sowing two types of seed in the same field? These laws seem arbitrary until you realize the trauma that underlies them. The primordial catastrophe was precisely a mixing of categories, celestial with terrestrial, angelic with human. The laws of separation were constant reminders that boundaries exist for a reason. Why did the prophets denounce the worship of the hosts of heaven with such vehemence? Because they knew what Enoch knew, that some of these celestial bodies represented rebel intelligences. Worshipping them was repeating the antediluvian era. It was bowing again to the powers that had nearly destroyed humanity. The canonical Bible forbids these practices. Enoch explains why they are so dangerous, and this brings us back to the fundamental question. What does the Book of Enoch reveal about biblical times that we could not know otherwise? It reveals that the biblical world was a world at war. Not just war between nations, but war between dimensions, angels against angels, humans trying to navigate between cosmic forces that vied for their loyalty. Knowledge being offered both by God and by his enemies, and humanity having to discern which knowledge brought life and which brought death. It reveals that history has a script. Events are not random. The apparent chaos is, in fact, a drama with defined acts. Creation, fall, flood, covenant, law, prophets, exile, restoration, and finally, judgment. Each phase preparing for the next, each generation carrying the torch until the moment when the Son of Man would be revealed in glory. And it reveals that humans matter in a way we might not expect. Angels fell because of humans. Faithful angels serve humans. The final judgment revolves around the treatment given to humans. And one human, Enoch, was elevated so high that he touched the identity of the celestial Son of Man himself. We are not observers in this drama. We are the prize, the battlefield, and potentially the judges who will sit to evaluate angels when everything is over. Now, as we approach the end of this journey through the Book of Enoch, one question remains. Why does this matter today? We live in an age that discards the supernatural. Angels are figures for Christmas decorations. Demons are metaphors for psychological problems. The idea of celestial beings interfering in human history seems to belong to a bypassed age of superstition. But consider this. The same questions Enoch addresses still haunt us. Where does evil come from? Why can knowledge destroy instead of liberate? Why do we feel that there is something deeply wrong with the world, something beyond mere bad human choices? Why does history seem to move in cycles of progress and catastrophe, as if forces greater than ourselves were in conflict? Enoch offered answers. You may reject them, but you must at least consider that millions of people, for thousands of years, found in them something that resonated with their deepest experience of reality. And perhaps it is precisely here that Enoch becomes more relevant than ever. We live in an age of explosive knowledge. Every year, humanity accumulates more information than all previous generations combined. We have mastered the atom. We have decoded the genome. We have created artificial intelligences that challenge our understanding of what it means to think. And with every advance, a question hangs in the air, usually unformulated. Should we be doing this? The promise of the Watchers echoes through the millennia. Knowledge, power, transcendence of human limitations. They offered the ancients exactly what our era offers us, the ability to remake reality according to our desires. And what Enoch documents is the cost of that bargain, not because knowledge is evil in itself, but because knowledge without a moral anchor becomes a weapon. Ability without character becomes oppression. Power without wisdom becomes self-destruction. Look at the technologies that worry us most today. Weapons that can devastate entire cities, algorithms that manipulate the behavior of billions, biotechnologies that promise to redesign human nature itself. Each of them carries the mark of the original temptation, the whisper that we can be like gods, knowing good and evil, the invitation to cross boundaries that perhaps exist for reasons we do not fully understand. Enoch does not condemn knowledge. He condemns stolen knowledge, snatched before its time, transmitted by messengers who had their own interests in mind, not ours. And he invites us to ask, where does the knowledge we are embracing come from? Who offers it? For what purpose? And are we ready, morally, spiritually, socially, to carry its weight? There is another dimension of the Book of Enoch that speaks directly to our modern condition, the promise of judgment. To contemporary ears, judgment sounds threatening, punitive, a relic of fear-based religions. But in the context of Enoch, judgment is a promise. It is hope. It is the guarantee that injustice will not have the final word. Think of the cries that echo through human history, the victims of genocides who never saw justice, the innocent crushed by tyrants who died in their beds, the silenced generations whose cries were never heard by any court. What Enoch declares is that those cries were heard. Every single one of them. Angels carried them to the throne. And one day, the day, every account will be settled, not by imperfect human vengeance, but by perfect divine judgment. For those who suffer injustice, this is not a threat. It is the only real hope that the universe is not, in the end, morally indifferent. That evil does not win simply by being more brutal, that there is a judge who sees what is hidden and weighs what is concealed. And for those who commit injustice, consciously or by omission, Enoch is a reminder that time does not erase. Human forgetfulness is not cosmic absolution. Death is not an escape. There is a record. There is a tribunal. There is a moment when every secret will be brought to light. This is not a popular message in an age that prefers to think we can define our own reality, our own morality, our own destiny without reference to any authority beyond ourselves. But it is a message that billions of people across thousands of years have recognized as true. Not because they were indoctrinated, but because it resonates with something they know intuitively, that there must be more than this. That justice cannot be just an arbitrary human concept, that good and evil are not simply cultural preferences. And then there is Enoch, the man, not just the book, but the figure who inspired the book, a human being who walked with God so intimately that he did not experience normal death, who was translated, taken to an existence beyond common mortality, who saw what few have seen and returned to tell the tale. His existence is a declaration. It says that the chasm between the human and the divine is not impassable, that heaven and earth are not sealed compartments, but dimensions that touch, that human beings, fragile, limited, mortal, can have access to realities that transcend their apparent condition. This was revolutionary in the ancient world, and perhaps it is even more revolutionary today, in an age that has reduced the human being to a biological accident in an indifferent universe. Enoch insists that we are more, that we were made for more, that there is a calling upon us that exceeds our visible horizons. The Book of Enoch has survived empires. It has survived attempts at suppression. It has survived centuries of oblivion in the sands of Ethiopia and the caves of Qumran. It persists because it touches something that does not die, the human intuition that there is a world beyond the world, that invisible forces shape our visible history, that we are in the middle of a story larger than any nation, any era, any civilization. You can read Enoch as ancient literature, fascinating in its historical context. You can read it as theology, offering answers to questions the canonical Bible leaves open. You can read it as prophecy, mapping a future that is still unfolding. Or you can read it as millions have read it before you, as a window to reality as it truly is, behind appearances. What you do with this knowledge is your choice. Enoch does not force, he reveals. He presents the evidence and lets you decide, just as his first reads decided, just as the Essenes at Qumran decided, just as the first Christians decided, just as the Ethiopian church decided when everyone else discarded it. The story of Enoch, both the man and the book, is in the end a story about choice. The Watchers chose to fall. Humans chose to accept their gifts. Noah chose to remain faithful. Communities chose to preserve the text or discard it. And now you choose what to do with what you have heard. 5,000 years ago, according to the tradition that surrounds him, Enoch looked at the sky and saw what was to come. He saw the fall, the flood, the judgment, the restoration. And he saw beyond to the moment when all creation would be renewed, when evil would be finally eradicated, when the righteous would inherit a purified earth under open heavens. This vision sustained generations of believers through persecution, exile, and apparent defeat. It offered something that no human philosophy can offer: the certainty that the end of history will not be determined by the strongest or the most brutal, but by the most just, by the only truly just one. And perhaps that is what the Book of Enoch reveals most clearly about biblical times and about all times. That behind the apparent chaos, there is order. Behind the apparently triumphant evil, there is inevitable judgment. Behind death, there is life. And behind everything, there is He who was before all things, who sustains all things, and who will lead all things to their appointed end. Enoch saw. Enoch recorded. Enoch was taken never to return, except through the words he left behind. And now those words have reached you. If you made it this far, click on the next video appearing on your screen. I selected it especially for those who watched this one until the end.